Hello and welcome to the Shepheard Walwyn podcast series. My name is Jonathan Brown. Shepheard Walwyn is a campaigning book publisher based in London, England. Our purpose is to uncover and promote new ideas to society's oldest problems. And whilst our specialty is ethical economics, something Anthony Werner, our driving force for over 40 years, has pioneered, we have branched out over the years to other related areas such as the environment and the lives and works of society's change agents. These podcasts promote ideas we're convinced can actually help us build a better society for all of us. So have a listen and be sure to share with your friends if you like them, but also tell us what you think. These are debates we all need to be part of. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. My guest today is a very familiar face, Akhil Patel, author of the truly remarkable Secret Wealth Advantage, How You Can Profit from the Economy's Hidden Cycle, and long-term collaborator with the company's founder, Phil Anderson. Akhil, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jonathan. Good to be back.
So, Akhil, I've just been going over your book again, and I think we're into chapter 12, the mania. Is that right? And I just wondered if you could take us through, first of all, what seems to be remarkably prescient assessment of where you predicted the market to go. How has it been since publishing your book, The Secret Wealth Advantage?
Well, it's been pretty good, I'd say. I never knew really what to expect. It's sort of a niche subject and it's not necessarily everyone's cup of tea, but the people who've read it and engaged with it, I think we've got over 10,000 sales in the last year and a half, which I don't know if that's good or bad, but it seems significant.
I would say it's remarkable. 10,000 sales for a book on a seemingly esoteric topic of economic cycles, I think is extraordinary.
Well, thanks. I think the reaction from most of the readers, at least what I can gather from emails and Amazon reviews, has been pretty positive. So I'm very pleased with it. I took the view when I got to the end of it that I had essentially put everything I had into it, and that even if no one bought it or no one liked it, I would be still pleased with it because I knew I'd given everything I had and I was pleased with the final product. But I'm pleased that other people have enjoyed it as well.
This is your characteristic modesty at work here, Akhil, because I'm looking at Amazon and you have 154 ratings, averaging at 4.7 out of 5 stars. The summary is they find this book easy to read and engaging, the structure is helpful, and the book provides insightful knowledge for investors looking to take action. Readers appreciate the practical guidance and research-based content. And one of the top reviews is a must-buy for property and stock market investors. Brilliant synopsis, winning combination, how to keep your money safe. There's one comment, the title's a bit naff, but don't be put off. It's what's in
The title did take a bit of work, but interestingly enough, I'd sort of proposed the Secret Wealth Advantage as a working title when I got my book proposal to the publisher. When I was writing it, I kind of said to him, to the commissioning editor, that maybe we should go for a different title. He said, "You'll need to persuade me because this is one of the few titles that the entire commissioning group or whatever they have in the publishing house, it's the only working title that they've all agreed with that we should go with. So I didn't manage to find a better one. Some people have thought it's a bit naff."
I really like it. I think it's good and it is an advantage. It's a Ronseal title because it does exactly what it says on the cover. With the feedback on Amazon, nearly 4.7 out of 5 is remarkable, and you've got some real fans and followers now. Was that consistent with the feedback you've had from the book from other places? I know you've been on podcasts as well.
Yeah, it's consistent, and I'm pleased to say it's also what I was intending to do. I'm not the first person to write about the 18-year cycle. Readers of the books of Shepheard Walwyn will know that I've delved very deeply into a number of titles published by Shepheard Walwyn. I think what I was trying to do is distill all of that insight into easy to understand and follow, and set out in a structure that people could track the cycle in real time whenever they happen to be reading it, and to really understand why the cycle happens and why no one sees it. From the feedback, I think I've managed to achieve it for the people who have engaged with it. And that's been really pleasing, because to take something relatively complicated and make it simple is probably the hardest thing of all. And then to give some practical suggestions for people to put the knowledge into practice, I think was also quite important.
I agree. If it's almost a reader's guide to the best book Shepheard Walwyn's published, I think that's a great starting point. Going into things like Fred Harrison's Power in the Land,
Yeah,
Mason Gaffney's Corruption of Economics,
yeah.
um, and also as I talked at the launch, other stories that you've told, it's wonderfully articulate. So I'm hoping that at Christmas you got your bragging rights back to your family, because I know they were teasing you about how long the book took. Uh, this has
Yeah.
got to be a case of it was worth the effort.
It was just funny, before it was published, people were asking me when is it coming out. Now people are asking me when is the next one coming out.
Is that on the cards?
Not precisely. I think I would like to write another book at some point, but the memories of the difficulty of getting this one over the line are still fairly strong. Actually, what I'd like to do, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, is to try and use some of it in different formats and so on. So I think that's the next project. But in between all of that, as you said at the start, we have mania going on. And just to write about that for my subscribers is also taking my time.
And I know that's what you're helping people with, right? At the moment, I'm looking at chapter 12, based on the cycle and the expectation from Fred Harrison's work, Phil's work, and
Yeah.
other people as well, whether you're going all the way back to Homer Hoyt. And those guys were now into chapter 12, which you describe as the mania.
Yeah.
I just wonder if you can take us through that, because also right now in the UK, it doesn't feel like the peak of a boom.
Yeah.
Optimist people are the opposite.
Yeah. Look, I think there's a few things we could say about that. In general, if you're taking a global perspective, particularly in parts of Asia and the United States, parts of Latin America, and even sub-Saharan Africa, selectively, it depends on where you are. I think you see things going full on gangbusters, a lot of construction, building, but people trying to find ways to invest their money, doing so fairly speculatively. And we can go into examples we've seen just over the last weekend. Um, to your point about Europe, I think we've always said, those of us who've studied the cycle, that it's never the case that every single economy or part of economy is going to experience this phase of the cycle in the same way. It's possible that parts of a country or parts of an economy were so burned by the previous bust, for example, that not much of anything happens in the next cycle. And a very good example of that would be Japan in the 2000s, so burned by the 1990 onward crash and deflation and depression that it didn't have much of a boom in the 2000s. I think the UK is a fairly unique case. I think we were gearing up for a fairly significant boom as of the sort of first part of the cycle. We had sort of major investments and concepts of linking all the cities of the north by rail. And then from 2016 onwards, the Brexit referendum was a turning point. Subsequent events have exposed the fact that the UK has some pretty serious issues when we're cast adrift. We're very dependent on foreign labour. We're very dependent on cheap imports, and when imports rise in price, the economy struggles. We're finding that increasingly after 2022, when the world seemed to fall apart in some ways, inflation, war in Europe, and so on. We've struggled to cope. One of the most damaging effects of Brexit, regardless of whether you think it's right or wrong, I think most people agree that we've wasted several years arguing about things as opposed to making significant long-term investments in the future. We're reaping some of that now. You would have expected raising interest rates to 5% from zero, and the sort of inflation that we have experienced, given that we're a very debt-laden economy that's very tied to its property market. You would have expected all of those developments to have precipitated a fairly significant crisis. The fact that we haven't, in my view, speaks to where we are in the cycle. I think things will be very different when we get beyond the peak, but obviously that's for future years of discussions.
Mm. No, I think you can, and certainly my sense, because I voted to remain, and then looking at what happened to politicians from Europe and further afield after that, I've converted to I'd rather be ruled by a corrupt politician in London than a corrupt politician in Brussels, which is not much of a choice. And people blaming the decision rather than what politicians didn't do after the decision
such as there's exactly as you said, where's the vision for the country? If we are going to do our own thing, then what is our own thing? Are we going to invest? I'm wondering, without sounding too academic, it's basically the consequence of neoliberal policies of trust the market it will provide. So many companies have not been thinking about developing people or creating a pipeline of staff to come through. Now you've got a prime minister in the UK saying, I want to build 1.5 million homes. I've got friends in the construction industry saying there are literally no people to build a
Yeah,
home. We were dependent on, especially Eastern European labour before
yeah.
2016, very good Polish workers especially. And they just don't, the companies don't invest in staff development or young people coming into the industry. And that's a consequence of what we've got now. And now we've got severe supply side constraints and there's just aren't the people to build the houses.
Yeah, I totally agree. I also voted Remain. I sort of rather regret leaving the EU, but for different reasons. Some of them are emotional rather than economic. No set of political arrangements are going to be perfect. We need to have long-term thinking at any point in the cycle. And we, I think, have, at least from what I can tell, maybe there's something brilliant going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. Or maybe some of the things that people have done in a small way are starting to have an effect. At some point, we'll see them. But I think we've just manifestly failed to do a lot of that. I totally agree that accountability should be as local as possible so that people have a direct say in decisions. If they're bad, they can be changed. I certainly agree with that principle. In any case, populist anger across the globe has originated in the idea that markets don't deliver, they distribute wealth unequally, and so on. To my mind, this is a symptom of the kind of land monopoly capitalist system that we have that leads to 18-year cycles of boom and bust. It's essentially Henry George, who wrote Progress and Poverty, on which my book and the book of other prominent Georges like Mason Gaffney, Phil Anderson, and Fred Harrison is based, talked about the law of economic rent and the law of wages as the counterpart to that. The distribution of income is very much skewed towards owners of land and away from people who are providing their labor. Wages will go down to the lowest level that people will accept. When you have a relatively open economy like we do in the UK, people come in from overseas seeking economic opportunity. They're willing to work for much lower wages and much harsher conditions than the local population. That has a depressive effect on the entire wage structure of an economy. It's no wonder that you get serious bouts of inequality in places where people are incapable of spending money because they just don't have any disposable income, and businesses in those areas shut down and there's really nothing going on. Investment goes elsewhere and you get these massive inequalities. It's absolutely not a surprise that people are angry about their situation and vote to try and change things. The problem is that you vote to change things, and to my mind, until you change the system along the ways in which Henry George set out and as advocated by people like Fred Harrison, the person who comes in to follow them has no better idea. The results and the consequences will be exactly the same. We'll see this play out in the fullness of time. It's just unfortunate we go through these cycles of boom and bust, and nothing seems to get better.
Yeah. I'm looking at point one of chapter 12, and it's great. I'm laughing now because it just seems so accurate, which is the stage is ignited by a change in regulations, which leads to a surge in land prices. And I think about what Donald Trump's set out to do already. So he's already saying no new regulations and we're going to freeze it. You're looking at this remarkable idea of the Department
Yeah,
of Government Efficiency, which is all about reducing regulations and
yeah.
freeing people up to be entrepreneurial. So that's the stated aims, right? And so now we're looking, I guess, from point two, the mania is driven by new lenders and construction surges. Stock market surges reflecting extreme valuations and the economic boom.
So the regulation bit was intended broadly in the sense of a change in government policy, or indeed a new government, or policy being moved to elsewhere. So if you have, say, for example, the end of a war, then government policy had been directed towards that war, and is now there's what's known as a peace dividend, i.e., you've started to invest in kind of domestic civilian things rather than military things. You get that final surge. I hadn't seen it articulated like that in the other sort of books, Fred Harrison's and so on. I hadn't quite seen it articulated like that. It seems to me, if you're looking at Japan in the 1980s, orienting itself towards more domestic consumption rather than being a very driven export-oriented economy, you saw that in the 2000s, various deregulatory moves in the financial sector and so on. And so you get these things which produce the final 2 years of mania. I think in this cycle, at least in the US, it's quite likely that Donald Trump has had that effect, simply because you can see a very decisive shift in tone of what's being reported and what people are saying in November's election results. He's come in with all sorts of ideas. He's got the backing of some quite interesting characters who have their own ideas and are pushing it through the administration, deregulation of certain industries, focus away from certain types of investment in clean energy towards more domestic energy production, for example, and potentially reducing the size of the state. Though I remain a little skeptical at how much can be done, but more importantly, if you actually were to reduce the government deficit by 2 trillion at a time when there's a sort of economic boom going on, the economy, as we know, as you get to the peak, gets weaker and weaker because of high land prices, it actually might be the thing that precipitates crisis. But anyway, we will see how the next sort of 18 months play out, and I'll be happy to report back the next time we talk on the podcast.
There's a remarkable date I think was designed to stop in 18 months' time. So it's in line with the anniversary in May or June 2026, which would be a remarkable point for the inflection point to happen. Right, that was the moment where it actually shifted. And seemingly it would be people freeing up this so-called bureaucracy and unleashing the last hurrah. And you look at the speculative activity that came from Trump's cryptocurrencies and the stuff coins, I guess we could call them, with Trump and Melania, and the extraordinary fluctuations in those prices of people jumping into stuff, really quite extraordinary.
It is quite extraordinary. It's probably introduced a lot of people to crypto for the first time. And once they get the taste of 1,000% returns, they're going to be putting it into all sorts of things. It's a very different environment we're talking about. I use chapter 10 of my book, which was about the land boom. I use the example of the 1840s railway boom fairly deliberately, partly because it was 180 years ago. It involved a very new technology, in that case, the railways, which required lots of capital investment. Most importantly, you had all these little railway companies. Some of them are totally fraudulent. There's a lot of railway companies. There was a real appetite for investing in them. For the first time, they were priced at fairly low levels, so even people on low income could participate. It created this enormous stock market boom in railway stocks. I see something similar with AI. Everyone's talking about AI, but also with blockchain-based kind of investing and kind of meme coins. And I think the word you were very politely declining to say was shit coins. It's very interesting, a repeat of history. I'm sure there are plenty of people who think that paradigm and mode of investing and so on, that's exactly what you expect to see at this point in the cycle.
In some respects, it's the purity of them. I am drawn to them in an intellectual way because it can't get any purer of the idea of built on nothing and manufactured out of thin air. When you get into fractional reserve banking, you see what it really is and how the banks really operate. Even the Bank of England admitting that the banks literally create money out of nothing and put it on their balance sheet. A shitcoin is literally that, right?
It's a bit of code. Yeah, it's a bit of code.
It's literally lines on a computer and someone says, I bring this into being. And I'm thinking, well, you can't get purer than that in terms of product or item creation.
It's pure speculation, but quite interestingly, a lot of members of parliament in the 1840s were involved in these dodgy schemes that actually there was no railway behind them. There was just total fraud. I think there are sort of interesting parallels. But just to make the point, though, and I try to explain this also in chapter 8 and 9 in my book on money. The nature of money is that it's always created out of nothing. You might use an expensive token to signify that, but it's the designation of that token as something that can be exchanged for other things of value that makes it money. Ultimately, someone or a community has to agree that that token is going to count as money. Banks creating money out of nothing is the normal state of affairs. The issue is what that money is used for. And when banking is based upon providing credit to people and businesses to expand production, that is a highly beautiful kind of system. When it's done for pure speculation, land acquisition, then it's a highly speculative, in some ways immoral, and dangerous. The question about money and creating things out of thin air is, what is it done for? And similarly with government spending, it's money creation out of thin air. But the issue is what government is spending money on. Sometimes governments can get it right and make sound investments in technology, developing a skilled labor force and getting people around the country, and sometimes can fritter it away on stupid things like fighting with other people and investments to favour a particular constituency, which is inflationary and a total waste of money, bad capital investment.
I noted the Labour government's policy on AI. They want to become an AI powerhouse. And having gone through the esports boom bust and having been right in the middle of that and to see it build up around me and then to disappear, you just look at all the money going into AI and it's like, well, actually, AI is tremendously deflationary in because it's so amazing in the extra output one person can produce. There's just not going to be really high paying jobs, and you're not going to need all those people in law firms and consultancy firms and all those areas. So I'm thinking there's an enormous level of reallocation of labor to go on. And a lot of people at ages where they wouldn't normally get to be reallocated or have to reallocate resource. And so there's tremendous challenges coming. And likewise, there was an insurgent in AI recently called DeepSeek that's come out of China. And they're offering things at a price point that just destroys the business model of all the American companies, like literally decimates it. And it's as good, if not better, currently. And so we've got those challenges to...
Now is the optimistic phase of the AI boom or revolution. You can get a bunch of billionaires together and say, right, we're going to invest 500 billion in X, Y, and Z. Overall, I'm a techno optimist. I believe that technology does advance human civilization. And ultimately, what will be the effect of AI is to create jobs in areas that we just can't even imagine now, a bit like the railways did in the 1840s and 50s. Construction, services, tourism, and so on all started with the railways. AI is going to do the same thing, but it's the transition to that phase which is going to be very problematic. And the downside of the AI revolution will be seen at the end of the cycle when things aren't, land prices aren't going up. And I think it will be an extremely difficult time for us for a few years before we work things out. What I'd say now about AI investing is there are some really interesting companies. Probably most of the companies that are doing AI now and sort of claiming some great sort of benefit and so on, probably not really great investments. I think the value in developing AI models is not great, actually. ChatGPT, the most adopted app in history, charges £20 a month. I don't think they can make money at that price point, but people aren't going to pay more than £20 a month, at least not everyday consumers. It's just too expensive. I think there's huge returns on investment there. It's more when you apply AI to certain sort of industries in a localized way. I think that's when it will really show its value. But it's very deflationary, absolutely.
And going back to your point about the importance of someone thinking coherently or looking ahead, is the UK saying they want to be in AI, but to do that you have to have energy. And we have such a poor energy policy that power cuts are really on the cards. Even back in 2008, I was looking at what the governments weren't doing. I was thinking what we need in every house that I build is a separate building for a generator. Sound insulated so you don't hear it chugging away when the power cuts come. That's what we're heading for with the policies that the government are bringing in, and also lack of investment from companies who should be looking ahead 10, 20, 30 years for energy supply and building things that can take a decade to produce, especially in the UK when construction's so backward. And we've just not been doing it.
I totally agree. The industry standards really not necessarily fit for purpose. We also have a stock of buildings, houses in particular, which are really not very efficient. So, I mean, the only thing that is essentially a free lunch in all of this, and it's not really free, but if you know what I mean, it's the most cost-effective thing to do is to improve insulation, improve energy efficiency in a lot of buildings. So you reduce demand, so at least you create some space in the energy system for new things. I was actually working in energy and climate change about 15 years ago. There were some interesting policies, But it was very clear that the most important was reducing energy demand through energy efficiency. And there were quite a few different areas in which that could be done. But I don't think any of those have been done in the way that would have the most effect, because we've not found a way of improving efficiency of buildings. I mean, I'm not an expert. Maybe that's a very ignorant thing to say, but it strikes me that that's the thing that people thought would happen. This has not happened. The rest of the approach to energy policy, I think, falls. And I think you're right.
Ironically, mate, it's one of the things that government cut the budget on, right? In 2010, they went hard on cutting back on stuff, cutting back on things that would have been a good investment, even if there was an outlay at the beginning. So we've been talking about UK and Europe and how the challenge is that there's a possibility that they're going to get passed by. And so I guess our advice for investors is to look further afield to see where they can appropriately invest in other areas that are booming. But this comes with the caveat that this is heading into what Fred Harrison called the winner's curse phase, of where you can buy an asset and then within a relatively short amount of time could actually turn to be a curse rather than being a winner. So what are you, in the other work that you do, not just writing books, but actually advising investors and property share market economics, suggesting for people to do at the moment?
I think the most important thing is not to get ahead of yourself and start selling everything. It's an interesting point of the cycle where optimism is getting ahead of things and people jumping in when they shouldn't be, borrowing too much to do that. We're advising people shouldn't do that. By all means, buy into the stock market or buy property which is appreciating in value. Just don't borrow too much, to do so, and be very clear about the business case for a particular property or stock investment. On Europe being passed by, it's true that economically you're not going to get a very massive boom. I just don't see the signs of it. You will have localized things. A lot of investment went into Paris last year. There would have been knock-on effects on that. I don't know. I'm not an expert in the Parisian property market, but I'm sure that property owners as well, if they were in the right locations. So it's not totally bad. The UK and German stock index is actually doing rather well. The UK looks like it's broken out. The DAX has been going up very strongly. So there are opportunities if you're looking for it. It's just that you don't get too caught up in the overall narrative. You treat each investment on its own merits, not what people are saying about the health of the economy and so on. But yes, you'd see probably bigger action in the US, in other countries, where if there is a commodities boom with all this investment, some of it might depend on what China decides to do by way of stimulus. If you get all of that, then there will be opportunities in the commodity space and US markets. Japan is looking quite strong at the moment. India and parts of Asia, which are, as we discussed earlier, going up pretty hard at the moment.
Fascinating. So obviously, if people are followers of this podcast, I'm sure many of them have already bought it. But if they haven't already bought the very highly rated Secret Wealth Advantage, what else can they do and where can they find out more?
If you've not read the book, buy the book. Read chapters 12 to 14, if nothing else. There's an audio version. You'll be pleased to know it's not me reading it out. If you want to know more about the cycle and get regular updates from us, that's Phil Anderson and me and our team, the easiest thing to do is to go to www.propertysharemarketeconomics.com and sign up to our free newsletter, which is called the Property Cycle Investor. And that's a weekly sort of update on interesting news and how it fits into the cycle. People can follow it in real time. We've got paid membership services if people are interested, but I think the best place to start is with our free newsletter at www.propertysharemarketeconomics.com.
I look forward to the next update. I think your next book should be I Blooming Told You, the way things are shaping up. So in 18 months, when we're looking at how successful or not Elon Musk has been in transforming the bureaucracy of America, the greatest boom in history and the golden age of America, then let's have another check-in then, if not before. Thanks as always, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Shepheard Walwyn podcast. To explore these ideas further, be sure to visit our website www.shepheardwalwyn.com and join our mailing list for news and special offers. Check out our authors and buy the books to learn more. And you can also find us on social media. Links are also on the website. And if you like the podcast, please head over to iTunes or Spotify to give us a review. It's surprisingly helpful in getting the ideas out there. So until next time, keep reading